Hello, everybody. How's it going? You can see I have some friends with me today. Boy, I look a little dark. I'll be right back. I'm going to turn another light on. I want to be as bright as those doggies. Hold on just a second here. Okay, hope everyone's doing well. Looks like we're in pretty good shape, light-wise and sound-wise, as far as I can tell. All right. Let me take a second here before we continue with the lectures and see if there's any questions. I will tell you that we believe your first test will be a week from this weekend. I'll give you more details as the time comes up, but it would be available to you, say, a week from Friday. What date is that? Is that the, 12th or something like that? 13th? I don't remember. But it would be a week from Friday, and you'd have you'd have all of Friday and then Saturday at least to take the exam during some 2-hour period. Probably will give you more details as we approach, but that will be your midterm exam a week from Friday. Okay. I know in the summer everything comes up so quickly. It seems like we just started, of course, but that's the way summer works. Any questions on anything to do with the exam or the course or any of the lecture material or anything like that at this point? Go ahead and you can either put it in the chat or you can speak out loud or raise your hand. Anything at this point. Okay. Well, if anything comes up, please do let me know. Of course, you do have your discussion sections tomorrow, and Chuan will be presenting important material that is neither in the book or in the lecture material, so it's important that you do attend those. They're not optional. All right, I think we're ready to start then. Cool. So let me go ahead and share our slides here. Oops. Okay, just give me a little second here. Hold on. Oh. Hopefully you're seeing those. I'm having a little trouble on my screen today. Hold on just a second. Let me correct this. Give me a second. Sorry, everybody. That's very strange. There we go. All right. Oops. Let me pin me and gosh, still takes a little while. There I am. There I am. And it'll make me big, but I am not seeing the normal stuff. So please do let me know either through chat or speaking up if you're not seeing those slides right now. What is going on here? That's really strange. Okay. Let me try sharing one more time. Hold on just a second. Sorry about this, everybody. I'm going to turn this off and share again. Something seems to be a little odd here. Okay. Share screen. Yeah, should work. PowerPoint. Okay. Well, that's how it's working today. All right, I assume you're seeing everything fine, and you see me in the top right of your screen, and that's how it's going to be recorded. Please do let me know if anything else seems weird. Yeah, that's fine. You're seeing PowerPoint. Oh, do I have this? Hold on just a second. Let me just try one more thing here. do get a chat here. Yes, we can see the slides. Great. Thank you, Bonnie. I appreciate it. I'm going to just try one more thing here. Now it's looking better. But let me now share again. Yeah, everything looks a lot better now for me. And hopefully there's no change for you. Everything looks good still for you. I just want to make sure that everything's recording correctly. Yep, good. Okay, so we left off talking about this really fascinating sport. And I should mention, just as a quick aside, this is literally one of the things that got me into doing perceptual psychology. I think I mentioned last class, at least, that my dad worked at an agency for the blind. And when I was a kid, I used to go to his offices and see all the cool devices they had for the blind, including this, a beeping softball. Now, I should mention, this is very old. I got this at least 10 years ago, and the battery doesn't work very well anymore. So it shouldn't sound like this. Sounds like a siren now. I have no idea why it changes the sound. But I went to his office and saw this and thought, oh my gosh, that the blind can play softball without seeing, and doing so based on sound, and learned a whole bunch of other stuff when I was a kid, and it kind of got me interested in perceptual psychology. But when I was writing the book, I decided to really kind of go out and try to learn a lot about the sport so I could write about it. So just very quickly, some details on this. Oops. Sorry. Of baseball. This is a sport that was, oh my gosh, invented in 1964, very soon after. Why is this not working? I'm sorry, folks. Yeah, very soon after, or very soon before I actually got introduced to the sport when I was a little kid. And I showed you a video last class, and we saw some of the rules of the game. The idea that the batter must run to the bases, which are located in first and third base position in a normal field. You're seeing that down here, a nice, oops, shoot. Hold on a second. Gosh. Yeah, right down there. Yeah, you're seeing it's a nice shot of the base there, and his job is to run to the base before the outfielder has possession of the ball. And if they do so, they score a run. If they don't do so, they're out. If the outfielders have possession of the ball before they run to the base, they hit the base, then they're out. Pretty much everybody on the field is blind. There are coaches that are sighted that are off the field that kind of help a little bit, but what you experience when you're watching this as a spectator is a lot of chatter. People are talking with each other about, where they think the ball is, and if they believe the ball's coming to them, they'll say, I have it, and that's to let other people know that they don't need to move towards that person. So there's a lot of talking. I did mention, however, that the pitcher and catcher are sighted. The pitcher is on the same team as the batter, and it's like coach pitch softball, if you've ever played Little League or anything like that. And that they spend a lot of time practicing together so that the pitcher learns to pitch the ball exactly where the batter wants it. And so they spend months and months getting that down. And even though the ball is beeping, I should mention, I thought this might be the place where the beeping sound is most important. Let me just step back for a second and say that we're trying to use this sport as a way for us to understand how our own brains respond to approaching sounds. Okay, and I thought the situation where the batter must hit the beeping baseball, because I knew they were able to do it and do it well, was an important demonstration of that. And it's interesting, I talked to them about this, and they said, actually, most of that skill comes from the practice and kind of the establishing of rhythmic coordination between the pitcher and batter. And they actually do practice this with some old balls that they take the battery out of, like this one that doesn't work really anymore, and practice batting like that. What's important is that the pitcher has to kind of give a signal when they're releasing the ball. So what you hear as you're watching is the pitcher throwing underhand will go ready, set, pitch. And when they say pitch, that means that tells the batter that they're letting go of the ball. And that coordination practiced over months is what allows the batter to actually swing. And of course, it's the batter's trusting the pitcher that they're putting the ball in the right position. So I think they get 5 pitches, 5 swings rather than 3, but they're hitting it more than 50% of the time that they're up at bat. So the batting averages are over 500. So they're able to do this. I mean, you know, pretty much everyone I saw who was at bat hit the ball. And of course, that is dependent, as I said, on the pitcher putting it in the right place at the right time for each batter. I should mention also that each batter has different preferences, so the pitcher has to learn where to put the ball and, you know, how fast to throw the ball and how to time, you know, the ready, set, pitch signal to the batter. So it's important that they practice a long time. Very often, I should mention that the pitcher is a sibling of one of the folks on the team, so they travel around with the team and, you know, have a lot of, they're just as much of the team as all the blind players are. So that's kind of the basis. I mean, that's kind of the basics of the sport. Anyone have any questions of how this works, what the rules are, anything like that? I should mention that most of the time when the ball is hit, the ball is, you know, it's a heavy softball, so it you know, goes towards the ground. But I did see a couple of pop flies, 2 of which were caught by the outfielder, which is just amazing to see. So you hear the beep of the baseball, you hear the crack of the bat hitting the ball, and it goes up, and they'll be able to tell almost immediately that it's going up. And I saw, you know, one of the outfielders kind of, you know, run into where they thought the ball might drop and put their, you know, kind of glove up like this, you know, thinking maybe there was a chance, and there was a chance. In fact, they were able to catch it twice, which was just amazing. Most of the time, though, it goes onto the ground. And so it's the job of the outfielder to basically jump to the ground and stop the ball, so they can have possession of it and then lift it up, okay? And that, as it turns out, is one of the most important parts of the sport for them to be able to perceive the kind of specifics of that auditory approach sound, okay? So fielding and running, which we'll talk about in a second, is where sound is most crucial for them. Okay, so let's put ourselves out in the field as a blind softball player, a beat baseball player, ready to, you know, stop the ball as it's coming towards us. Okay. So here's our job. We hear the ball being hit. We then hear that it's coming towards our position, which they can establish very quickly, you know, based on the sound of the ball coming towards them. What makes them a good player, though, is their ability to time the dive to the ground so that it stops the ball, but it's not too soon, so they don't know exactly where the ball is coming, right? They can have a general idea, oh, out of all the fielders, and they know where each other are, the blind fielders, because of their kind of continued chatter, like, hey, Bill, where are you right now? I'm right here, Steve, that sort of thing. So they know where they are. So they know what general spatial quadrant they need to kind of, you know, field as the ball's coming towards them. So they hear the ball coming towards them, and now their job is to dive to the ground and stop the ball, but they can't dive too quickly, because if they do, they won't know precisely where it is. I mean, if they dive too quickly, they could dive in this direction and the ball might pass them on the other side, in which case, you know, the runner would definitely score a run. So they have to wait to just the right moment to dive and make sure they're diving in the direction of where the ball is going, but not too late, so the ball goes past them. So timing the dive is the most important thing they do. So imagine now you're there, you're listening for the sound, you hear the crack of the bat, here comes the ball bounding to you on the ground, you know it's in your area, so you're going to have to be the one to stop it, so you're getting it out. And you have to make sure as the ball's coming towards you, you know where it is before you dive, but you can't dive too late or it'll go past you. So you have to time your dive in a way that uses this auditory approach information. So that's a really, that's where it's really important. And that, I interviewed them and they all said the same thing. Yeah, that's where you really have to listen to the ball and you have to have experience to know where the ball is going to be in a second, or less than a second in most cases. Now, remember, I said, I think I started this, didn't I, on the previous slide? Did I talk about this? Hearing the future, right? That was, I think, maybe the name of the section of the chapter. And that's the idea that you can anticipate where, in this case, the ball is going to be in just half a second or so, right? So you're able to perceive, the future position of the ball. And that's exactly what they must be doing here. And they must be doing it really well. And they spend months practicing this. They'll have the ball thrown out in their general area, and they'll have to practice their timing so they can dive at just the right spot so they don't let the ball go past them or they don't know exactly where the ball is. So that's the first place where an auditory approach becomes very important. The second place is actually a tiny bit surprising. It is when the batter is running towards the buzzing base. So in this case, they're not really interacting with the ball. They've already interacted with the ball. They've hit the ball. Now what they must do is run as fast as they can towards the base. And you saw that in the video before. Here's the image of it. He's running to the base. He must hit the base before the outfielder has control of the ball. Cool. They are taught, and if you know anything about the mechanics of running, if you're a runner yourself, they are taught to pump their arms as much as they can to get there as fast as they can. So, it's kind of intuitive, pumping your arms helps you run fast. When you're trying to run fast, you do pump your arms along as you're, as in coordination with your legs. However, right before they get to the base, they want to make sure that their chances of hitting the base are as great as possible. So right before they get there, what they do is they extend their arms out to make it likely they will hit the base. Okay. They're running as fast as they can towards that buzzing sound, that buzz sound. Okay, but they're running fast, so there is a chance they could miss it, right? So what they want to do is increase their chance of hitting the base by at the last second putting their arms out. So it is another situation where timing auditory approach is critical. But rather than a sound source coming to them as the ball is kind of bounding in the outfield, they're moving towards the sound source. But it's the same exact idea. They need to time this exactly, right? If in fact they don't pull their arms out fast enough, they might run right past the base, not hit it, in which case it's a good chance they'd be out. If, on the other hand, they pull their arms out in the beginning, say, that's what I would probably do with little experience playing this. If I hit the ball, I would hear the base and I'd start running to the base, but I wouldn't know where it was really because I have, very little experience doing this. So I'd put out my arms like this, probably too soon. And yeah, I might ultimately hit the base, but I can't run my fastest like this. Okay, I run my fastest like that. So the best way to do it is to run your fastest, pump your arms at the last, half second or a quarter of a second, pull your arms out. So this time this time of auditory approach is also important in that context as well. It's just really nice because it demonstrates that this skill that the brain has to perceive auditory approach isn't just for situations where a sound source, the beeping ball is coming towards you, but you're moving towards a sound source, okay? So this is great. These are wonderful examples of what we call auditory anticipation or auditory approach, okay? Being able to kind of predict, when you'll be at the position of a thing making sound, whether the thing's coming towards you or you're going towards the thing. And there's research in this. I forgot this. Somebody sent this to me after I lectured about it a couple of years ago. I love this. I'll just show you the clip. Did I make sure? Yeah, I think everything should work fine. Actually, this is a little video. I want to make sure this is going to look good for you folks. Such a cool example. Yeah, it should look great. I've never seen this live. I would love to. Amazing. Here, I'll stop it. Yeah, that in fact is two blind gentlemen playing tennis. I believe the racket and the size of the ball is standard, more or less. Clearly, the court is a little smaller. The rules are a little different. I believe it can bounce 3 times on each side. And of course, maybe most notably, the ball is making a sound. In this case, what they do, it's very simple. They just take a normal tennis ball, they put a little hole in it, they fill it with BBs or what buckshot, tiny little ball bearings. And they close it up. It's basically a rattle. And just by listening to the rattle of the ball, listening to the ball hit the floor, and as it rattles, making a different type of sound. As well as I think they probably listen to each other's sneakers, so they have a sense of where the position of the opponent is, because the sneakers make a lot of sounds as they're on the gym floor like that. They play, and it's just amazing. It's the exact same issue of having to perceive auditory approach, right? You're perceiving this sound source coming towards you and then having to time your swing. And if you time it too early, you'll likely miss the ball. If you time it too late, you'll likely miss the ball or just at least not get it over the net, right? The same exact thing. So it's just tremendous. Okay, let's go ahead now and talk about some of the science behind auditory approach. So another term for this that is used in the field is something called time to arrival. Okay, so the issue is how does the brain judge when a sound source, something making a sound, will be at its position, right? Whether it's a rattling tennis ball coming towards you, a beeping softball coming towards you, or you moving towards the base. In all those cases, the brain's job is to judge when the sound source will be at the position of the brain or the person that has the brain, right? And so somehow it has to use the sound or the acoustic cues that are available to it. And we do know something about the acoustic cues, right? So, I think we can make this intuitive, especially since we've already talked about echolocation, right? And we know a little bit about the acoustic cues that might be used for that purpose. Right, so as a sound source is coming towards you, say as that beeping softball is coming towards you, what sound changes might you notice? Well, the first thing, and I think this is something that we can kind of be consciously aware of, and that is it gets louder, right? As a sound source gets louder, as it gets closer, it gets louder, and that's certainly the case of the ball, right? Here, I don't need to really demonstrate this too much, but if it's back here, it's not as loud as it's up here, right? That's very obvious. Man, that's annoying. Anyway, I won't make that sound again. And so the brain could, simply listen to see how the sound is changing and know when it's very, very loud, it's probably close, and when it's quieter, it's probably further away. You'll see it's got to be a little bit more complicated than that because the sounds can start loud, right? It could be a very loud sound or it could be a very quiet sound. So it's all got to be relative. But that's certainly one of the cues that's used is what we call the intensity of the signal. as a sound source gets closer to you, it gets louder, it gets more intense. That's just, the physics of how sound works. But there's other aspects of the physics of sound that also are going to make a difference. And those are complexity, Doppler shift, what we call interaural, and then reflectances. And I'll take a couple of seconds and talk about each of these just to make them intuitive to you. Complexity has to do with how bright the sound is. Okay, complexity really is a description of what the physical wave looks like at the person's position, and it translates to kind of brightness. And here's, I think, the best way to have an intuition for this. When you're waiting at a stoplight, and you start to hear, probably coming from behind you, somebody who has one of those massive, amazing car stereos, right? They're listening to hip hop, in which case the bass is very pronounced. And when they're far away, you might start hearing, like the boom, boom, like that. Maybe a little bit of the bass guitar's notes, but not a lot. You just hear like, kind of this muffled sound coming towards you. And say they're coming towards you really slowly because it's a stop sign or stoplight, and they want to make sure they brake early. They're good drivers. And as it comes closer to you, you start to hear more of the song. So maybe now you can make out what those bass notes are. Maybe you can start making out a little bit of the kind of the muffled vocal line or something like that. And then it gets even closer. Now it's just, maybe a few feet behind you. And now you can hear a little of keyboard sound, the synthesizer or whatever, other aspects of the drums, until it's right next to you. And now you're hearing pretty much the whole song, right? So yes, it is getting louder as it's getting closer, but you're able to hear more detail. At first, you're just hearing kind of the low notes, but as it gets closer and closer to you, you hear more detail because you can hear the sound is being brighter, right? It's like, if you've ever, played around with the controls of your stereo in your car, you have this treble and bass control. I think most, you can do this with your AirPods or whatever as well by adjusting your iPhone. You can adjust how much treble and bass and stuff like that. But you might know that when you turn up the treble, it sounds brighter. And that is, that turning up the treble is very similar to what happens as a sound source gets close to you. As a sound source gets close to you, not only is it louder, but it's brighter. You're hearing more of the what we call the treble or the higher frequency components. Don't worry about the details of that. But just think about it. It gets brighter. It gets a little clearer, and that's what complexity means. Doppler shift, you've also probably experienced. I don't have a recording of it on the slide anymore, which means I get to make a sound for you. Think about an ambulance going by or a train going by as you're kind of waiting for the fire engine to pass or something, the siren going by. You might notice that it shifts in its pitch. So let me make an ambulance siren that's kind of a more European style, like, oh, I know, like if you're watching Mission Impossible and there's an ambulance going by very often, like in Paris or whatever, you hear this type of siren. It's like that goes, right? And then when you hear it going by as it's filmed, like maybe you see the ambulance coming and then it's kind of going by where the camera is positioned and then going away, you hear it do this. Right? And you would notice it getting quieter, but you also notice that there's a drop in the pitch. Right? Or a train whistle. That sort of sound. That's the Doppler shift. And it's known that the brain can also use that shift in pitch to know, where the sound source is. What else? Just don't worry too much about the technical details. I just want to give you intuitions on all of these. The next is interaural. What does that mean? It's a lot easier than that term sounds. Interaural just means the sound that's different between the two ears. Okay? And it's actually being shown in this image right here. This, by the way, I should say, this is referring to Doppler shift. If you're a physics fan, you get that pitch shift and Doppler shift because the waves get kind of squeezed together in front of the ambulance and then kind of get pulled apart as the ambulance goes by. That's why you hear that shift. But let's talk about intraoral. It's much easier than it sounds, as I said. Here's a sound source up here. Here's a head here, okay? When the sound is coming from the right side of the head, it gets to the right ear just a tiny bit before it gets to the left ear, okay? But the brain is very sensitive to that difference in the time to arrival to the right ear versus left ear. And even the subtle differences when the sound source kind of moves more to the right. Now it gets to the right ear a little bit sooner than the left ear than it did before. So think about it. Right now, okay, I don't know if you can see my arm here. Okay, right now it's getting to my right ear before my left ear, right? I start moving it out to the front. It's still getting to my right ear before my left ear, but now it's getting a little closer until the sound source is right in front of you, and now it's hitting both ears at the same time. And then if it continues this way, it's hitting your left ear a little before your right ear, and that's going to continue to provide an advantage to the left ear over the right ear as it's moving around. So those are just differences between the ears and how the sound source gets to the ears at different times that the brain can use to tell something about auditory approach, okay? There's another part of that as well. It has to do with the difference to the ears of not the time it gets to the ears, but how loud it is at the two ears. You wouldn't think this would make a difference, but it does. So your head acts like a baffle, right? We talked about baffles when we were talking about the sound engineers for TVs and TV shows and movies, that they will put a baffle up to kind of quiet down a sound, to portray some sort of object, a sound obstruction. Same thing with your head. So a sound's coming from your right, it hits your right ear, and then it does go to your left ear, but your noggin, especially my giant noggin, will actually dampen the sound a little bit, so the sound that gets to my left ear is quieter than the sound that gets to my right ear, okay? If the sound source is now directly in front of me, the sound gets to both ears at the same time and with the same intensity. And then as the sound source goes to my left, now it comes to my left ear, okay, directly, but then my giant noggin dampens the sound before it gets to my right ear. And that interaural difference that exists not just for time of arrival to the two ears, but the relative intensity is another cue the brain uses to determine auditory approach. In fact, going back to your car stereo, you have a way of adjusting the relative loudness of the side speakers on the right side versus left side, or the back versus front. You may have never played with this, but your car or your family's car likely does this very simply. You can make the sound so it's more prominent in back versus front. You can make it so it sounds maybe so it's coming from the right or left, seemingly more directionally to the right or left. And what you're doing there is just increasing the relative loudness of all these different speakers, and it gives the impression that the sound is coming from another location. That's what intraaural intensity does, okay? So all these cues are things the brain is using. Finally, we have what's called reflectances, and this you do know something about. Okay, we talked about the reflectances that are important in the echolocation examples, as well as just being able to determine the size of a room and the objects that are in a room and our position in a room, all that cool stuff we talked about last class. We also use the relative reflectances of sound sources to determine how close we are to an object. Okay, so the way I like to think about this, the way that I make it intuitive for myself, is to think of yourself being in like a big warehouse. Like the sound stage we talked about, like an airplane hangar, a large space. And imagine you're on one end and your friend is on the other end. Okay, and what they're going to do way down at the other end of the airplane hangar is just clap their hands. Okay, the sound is going to come all the way down from there to your ears. You'll hear the clap, but think about how else that's going to sound. There's going to be echoes that are also going to be something that you're hearing. In this case, you'll probably be very conscious of the echoes, right? Like that, because it's such a huge open space. Okay, so from far away, there's a lot of noticeable echoes relative to the actual clapping sound that's coming right to your ears. By the way, that's what this is showing too, that there is a sound going directly to the listener's ears, as well as reflectances and echoes that are bouncing off the different surfaces of the room. Okay, let's go back to the warehouse, and you're hanging out with your friend trying to, kind of understand acoustics. And now what you have them do is you have them come just right up to you, maybe, a couple of feet away, 3-4 feet away, and have them do the same hand clap. When you hear the hand clap with them close, okay, it sounds less echoey. There are sounds bouncing off, but you're getting so much of that direct sound, right? You're getting so much of that direct sound, it seems less echoey. And your brain is sensitive to that. It knows that as a sound source gets closer to you, the beeping softball, running to the base, the tennis ball, when that happens, okay, you get a higher proportion of direct sound from the source and less sound from the echoes that are also made. There might not be noticeable echoes out in a baseball field, but your brain is able to detect those sound reflectances. So each of those different things, the intensity, the complexity, the Doppler shift, the two types of intraoral cues, but the time of arrival to the two ears, as well as the relative loudness of the two ears, and reflectances will all tell the brain something about the position and changing position of a sound source. Cool? Does that make sense to you? Good. There's one more important component of this we need to talk about. And it's true, if it's an overarching component to all the different cues we talked about. It has to do with how the rate of change of all of these cues, the rate of change. So it's easiest, I think, if we talk about loudness and intensity. Okay, so think about the ball coming towards you. Right, and we'll just, again, all these cues are available to the brain, but now we're just going to talk about the fact that it gets louder as it gets towards you, as it comes towards you. Okay, the rate at which it gets louder is not really constant, and this has to do with the way sound energy is dispersed over space. As the ball gets closer to you, when it's first hit, it gets louder, but it gets louder a little slowly. But then as it gets closer and closer and closer, the rate at which that loudness changes increases. So it seems like it's getting louder faster the closer the ball is to you. That is what this last graph up here is showing you. Okay, so as the ball is first hit, the amplitude or the intensity, the loudness, in this case, we can say they're all the same. It says amplitude here, could say intensity. The intensity of the ball starts getting a little louder, but not that quickly. But then as it gets closer and closer, the rate at which it gets louder increases. Now that's really important because the brain is looking for where on that curve that loudness is changing. And by looking at that, by essentially analyzing the sound and knowing how quickly the sound is changing, it's telling the rest of the brain when it's time to dive. Okay, let me say this again. The brain not only needs to know that the object, the ball, is getting closer to us as we're the blind outfielder. It needs to know when it tells the motor part of the brain to dive onto the grass. And so what it's doing is it's kind of analyzing essentially how quickly how quickly it's changing in its loudness. If it's not changing, it's noticing that it's getting louder and it's coming towards me, right? But it's not changing that quickly yet. Not time to jump yet. Okay, how about here? Well, it's starting to get a little bit quicker in how quickly it's getting loud, but not here. Okay, now the brain goes, aha, I'm noticing a really big change in how quickly it's getting loud, and now I need to dive for the ball. And it's thought that that's how a blind baseball player, a blind tennis player, right? Any of us interacting with a sound source that is approaching us or we're approaching, that's how the brain does it. It's looking at that rate of change of loudness in this case. As I said, this rate of change thing is not just useful for using the intensity cue. It's also true of complexity and Doppler shift and intraoral reflectances. It's looking for where that change is on this curve as it gets closer. Does that make sense? I'm trying to think of another way I can portray it. The same thing happens visually. It's very interesting. The same thing happens visually. So here, we'll play with the ball. Now you're a sighted softball player. And let me pull this over so I can see how it looks to you. We are going to talk about sound, but I kind of just want to show you that the same thing happens with light, okay? Watch what happens as it's coming towards you, okay? Here it comes. And yes, you're seeing it get larger, but it's getting larger rather slowly. But then as it gets closer and closer, look how much faster its rate seems to increase. I'm using the green screen here, so all right, let me try this again. Here it comes, here it comes, here it comes, and look how faster. So back here, the change is kind of slow, but I'm not changing the speed, but as it gets closer, look how fast it then all of a sudden kind of takes up the screen. So when you play softball, potentially your brain, but in this case, your visual brain is doing the same type of thing. It's looking for where on this change in this case, I guess we'll say the visual size of the object is. Is it time to swing it? Is it time to swing? Hold on a second. Is it time to swing it? Is it time to swing? Not yet, not yet, not yet. Okay, now the ball's growing very fast, and now I'll swing. Okay, same thing with sight and sound. The brain for those baseball players is doing the same thing, but it's doing an analysis of the intensity of the sound, the complexity, etc. Okay? It's an important aspect of how the baseball player does his work. But you know where I'm going to go with this as I go with everything. This isn't just true of beat baseball players. This is true of all of us. And we talked about this scenario that I guess maybe is most intuitive to us, and one that we'll be talking about in some detail in just a second, where we need to be able to know from listening to cars approaching us whether we have enough time to cross the street. And I was thinking of this again when I was walking my dog this morning, who has this terrible habit of wanting to, relieve himself in the middle of the street. I'm pulling on him saying, no, you can't do that, Max the dog. But he wants to do it. I have no idea why. So what this means, garbage cans. What this means is that I need to listen very carefully to approaching cars that I can't see. And I need to know, are they coming at me fast enough? So are they close enough? So I need to really kind of turn around and then pull the dog away, or do I have a couple of seconds so I can kind of cross the street a little bit more relaxed and slowly, right? And there's research on this. In fact, we did some research on this years ago, where we asked people to listen to recordings of cars approaching a microphone. And then what we did, before the car arrived at the microphone's position, we would turn the sound off and ask people to press a button when they think the car would have arrived at their position. Okay, so here it is. You're listening to car sounds and you have headphones on. I think we just told people to close their eyes for this experiment. They were just in the laboratory room. They closed their eyes and they listened to the car sounds. We told them the cars are going to be coming towards you. It's going to sound like they're coming towards you because they're going to be coming towards the microphone that we recorded these sounds on. But we're going to ask you to press a button when the car is just at your position. But sometimes it's going to be the case that you're going to hear the sound just disappear and have to basically anticipate when it's going to be at your position by waiting and then pushing the button, okay? And what you find is people are great at this, right? Not surprisingly, right? You hear the car coming, like, and all of a sudden it just disappears, and you ask people to wait and then push the button when they think the car, given its constant velocity, would have been at your position. And people have no trouble doing this. They can do this, whether, don't worry about the details here, but whether they just hear the beginning of the sound, whether they hear 2/3 of the sound, certainly they're able to do it if they hear the entire sound. What you find, unsurprisingly, is that the blind are better at this than the sighted, right? So they have more practice, they're more dependent on car sounds in that type of context. And unsurprisingly, they're better than the sighted of us at making these judgments. But sighted folks are very good too, especially if they're given a little feedback. They can learn to be nearly perfect at this. So again, you're hearing the car come towards you, and then it just stops. But your job is to press a button, wait and press the button when you think the car would have been there. Sighted folks with a little practice can get amazing. What you find in all cases, though, is that if there are errors, the errors almost always go towards over-anticipating. What does that mean? That if, in fact, you're going to be a little bit off in that type of judgment, you're much more likely to say the car is going to be at your position earlier than it actually is, than later than it actually is, which is a safe type of mistake to make, right? So if you're not perfect with these sort of judgments, whether you're blind or sighted, whether you're practiced or not, okay, you're much more likely to say the car is going to be at your position sooner than it actually would be, than after it actually would be, okay? Makes perfect sense. Okay. We did this many years ago, well before you were born, just to see if people were good at it, people could improve. How much of the approach do they need to hear, all these sort of things. And you're going to see, it turned out, we didn't expect it at the time, but it turned out to have a very kind of important practical implication for modern cars, which I'll talk about in a second. But before I talk about that, I should say a lot of other people did this research with lots of other types of sounds, including beep baseballs and all that sort of thing. And they were able to determine things about the brain. So this isn't research I conducted, research some of our friends conducted on auditory approach and how the brain reacts to sound. And what you find is something, very consistent with what we've been talking about so far. And that is the fact that the brain does seem very sensitive to approaching sounds. In fact, I think the neurophysiological research suggests that it's more sensitive to approaching sounds than other types of sounds. So, when the brain is detecting increasing intensity in a sound, yes, it registers in the normal, sound areas of the brain, which I, told you are a little complicated as we understand it these days. But beyond that, it also activates areas associated with attention and motor responses, which is not true of sounds that are either, constant and not increasing in intensity or decreasing in intensity. What I just mean with increasing intensity is like versus constant sounds or decreasing sounds, right? Okay. When the brain gets that increasing loudness, okay, which, as you know, is associated with increasing closeness, it starts to activate specific areas of the brain that are going to be useful for reactions, only when it's getting those increasing sounds. What else? Well, brain research shows that there's a higher proportion of brain cells in the auditory areas that are reactive to increasing intensity than decreasing intensity or constant loudness, right? So there does seem to be kind of a greater proportion of brain area devoted to sounds that are increasing and potentially the sounds that are getting closer to us. So that's kind of how I introduce this whole thing, like, saying that the beat baseball players are a great way of illustrating how all of our brains are really sensitive to sound sources that are approaching us. Certainly, it takes a while to be a World Series level beat baseball player, but we all start out with these brains that are really, really sensitive to approaching sound. By the way, there's a whole literature that discusses the fact that infants also seem to be sensitive to approaching sounds, and I think you'll like this little anecdote. When my kids were little, I used to carry them around in these baby Bjorn things. What those things that kind of hang them off your chest. They kind of like it because they can, they're front and center. They can see everything. I used to walk my kids around the neighborhood down to the park so they could, kind of hang out. And especially my older son, my firstborn, used to like to kind of grab my fingers when he was walking with me in his baby Bjorn. And we're talking about, gosh, he must have been, he wasn't crawling then or anything, like must have been 4 or 5 months or something like this, maybe even a little bit younger. So he grabbed my little fingers almost like he was, holding a motorcycle handle or something like that as we were walking. And one thing I noticed, this is really cool, when there was a sound of a car approaching us from behind or approaching us from front, but it's irrelevant to sound because of the not being able to see it. When there was a car approaching us from behind, he would start squeezing my finger kind of in synchrony with the car's approach. So he would start squeezing harder and harder until the car would pass us. Now, it takes a big nerd daddy to recognize this as maybe like a little reaction to auditory approach, thinking about how this sounds. Like, who in the world would ever be, aware of this sort of thing? But, I studied this a little bit. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's really, kind of detecting the approaching sound that he can't see, the approaching car he can't see. And his little squeezing, for whatever reason, maybe it's making him a little tense or whatever, is kind of, a nice way of measuring how this is happening. Anyway, I know I'm kind of embarrassed I talked about it now, but, it's consistent with the research showing that infants are also very sensitive to approaching sounds. Okay. I said a few minutes ago that we're going to talk about a very kind of practical problem that now has arisen about auditory approach, but I think this might be a good time to do one of our polling questions, so we can take a little breather here. So I will stop sharing and we will do our first polling question of the day. So this one has to do with beat baseball. And what I will do is I will read it to you and then give you some time to respond. And then we'll talk about the answer and make sure that you have a screen capture of it for your studying, because this will be an example of this will actually be an exam question. Okay. In beat baseball, which of the following actions rely most on auditory approach information? In beat baseball, which of the following actions rely most on auditory approach information? You have this on slides, 2 slides before this one. Okay. A, pitching. B, running to a base. C, diving to stop a ball in the field. Or D, both B and C. Take your time. Doesn't have any bearing on your grade at all. Or your ego. You should be egoless when you do these. You just want to use it to learn. All right, I'll give you a few minutes to do this. You can look back on the slide if you want. All right, well, there's 7 of you now. All right, only 3 people. Okay, good. More people are responding. Maybe people aren't necessarily at their computers. That's okay. I am not taking it personally. Okay, that should do it. That's a minute. Let's go ahead. And you aced it. Yes. Pitching is not really a place where the beep is important. And as it turns out, hitting isn't as important as those other two things. So running to a base, the idea is you have to time your arm extension to hit the base to have the chance to hit the base as good as possible, because you're increasing your size essentially. But you can't do it too early, because if you pull out your arms too early, you can't pump your arms to run fast. It slows you down. So the timing of the approaching base is going to be really important to listen for. And then, of course, the example we talked about many times, being out in the field, hearing the ball coming towards you, and knowing that you have to dive at just the right time. You have to listen very carefully. Your brain has to detect kind of the increasing intensity at just the right time. So you dive and stop the ball. You don't dive too late and miss the ball, or dive too early and don't know the specific position of the ball. Okay, so it's those two situations in which sound auditory approach is the most important. Okay, so correct answer is D. Go ahead and take a picture of that if you haven't, and we'll go back to our lecture. And here comes the gardener, hooray. Okay. Cool. All right, so as I mentioned, there is a very practical context that has emerged over the last 10 years or so, where we've become very aware of auditory approach. And let me make myself big here. That is the context of what we can call the Prius problem, what we called back there the Prius problem. Oh my gosh. What is the Prius problem? Well, back then it was the case that by far Priuses were the most common hybrid cars. That's how it got to be known, the Prius problem. Don't know where you folks live or where you are right now, but certainly where I'm right now and where I live in Los Angeles, there are hybrids and electrics pretty much in every driveway now. Okay? Back in 2008, 2009, when we did this research, it was pretty much Priuses. But now, pretty much every car by every major manufacturer comes in a hybrid or electric version as well, right? And the most popular car, in much of West Los Angeles is in fact the Tesla, which is completely electric. So how is this a problem? Why is it called a problem? Well, what happened was back in around 2008, the National Federation of the Blind was very concerned about how quiet cars had become. Okay? And in fact, there were a lot of anecdotal reports of both blind and sighted pedestrians having trouble knowing that a car was coming towards them, right? Before it was very, very close. There were many near misses. There were some accidents. There were some people that were involved in accidents. And interestingly, the blind were kind of the first to notice it, but it was also, you started getting, people that were sighted saying, yeah, I was walking through a parking lot and all of a sudden I turned to my right and there's a Prius right there, which seemed to, appear out of nowhere. Like it just, poof, it was there. I had no idea it was so close. Parking garages, the same sort of thing. And maybe you've had this experience in Southern California, living in Southern California. I think most of us have had this at one point or another. And yeah, when you're close to cars like that, they are often going slow, but if you are hit even by a car going, say, 5 miles an hour, especially if you're an older person, it can be deadly. It really can be. If you're hit and you're a young person, you're healthy, you're going to get probably hurt if it's going 5 miles an hour, but you'll probably recover. But for older people who, can break hips very easily and that sort of thing, it can be very dangerous. And again, the blind were the first folks to notice this, but sighted folks did it as well. So it became a little bit of a notable problem. You started getting reports in the paper back then. National Federation of the Blind reached out to me because I had done this research on auditory approach before. It was actually, you know what, that auditory approach experiment I just mentioned, it was my senior thesis as an undergraduate. But we published it, and so they knew we did research on it. We had done a little bit more since then, but they said, is there something you can do? And I said, sure, we can experiment with different types of car sounds and see if it is more of a problem with hybrids and electric cars and Priuses, to see if in fact it is harder to perceive auditory approach with quieter cars. So what we did know is that people had measured the relative sound of Priuses, and at that point, the Camrys were not hybrid or electric at that point. They were all internal combustion engines. That's what ICE stands for here, internal combustion engines. And what they found with these cars is that when they're going, whether it's a Prius or a Camry going about 25, 30 miles an hour, there's actually very little sound difference. And I should say that dB, I probably should have just changed that to loudness difference. dB stands for decibels, and that's the measurement of loudness. But so there was very little loudness difference when those cars were going 25, 30 miles an hour. However, when they were going less than 20 miles an hour, the Prius turned out was much quieter, as was measured by sound level meters. Okay, especially when they were, Priuses can go back and forth between electric mode and gas mode. Right? When they were going like 10, 15 miles an hour or slower, 5 miles an hour in their electric mode, it was clear from measuring how loud they were that they were much quieter. The question is, were they quiet enough to be perceptually dangerous? Were they quiet enough to make it difficult for the brain to detect the sounds were there? So this is the research we did. And we did this right here behind the campus. You're seeing the experimental setup. There's a Prius coming. We're in a parking lot. The parking lot, by the way, is, I don't know if it's still called the Newman Center, but there's kind of a church religious center behind. You guys have Sprouts? Is that the grocery store behind campus? I can't remember. But it was called the Newman Center, 10 years ago, whatever. Don't know what it is now. But that's where we conducted this experiment. And so what we did is we put people out in parking lots and drove cars towards them. The cars did not drive directly at them. They passed in front of the listeners about 10 feet away. So, you'd be standing there, and you can see this individual has a little box there that he with buttons, and the car's blindfolded, of course, and the car's coming towards them and will pass them about 10 feet away. Okay. So, and by the way, we let the cars go no faster than 5 miles an hour. So the drivers were very careful not to go over 5 miles an hour. And we asked our subjects to determine not just whether they could hear the car, but something more specific. And that is whether the car that they were hearing was coming from the left or right. Because we felt a couple of things. First of all, it makes it easier to determine whether they're actually hearing it for real or they're thinking they're hearing it. Okay, that's an important part of it. And also we thought that was an important thing for safety issues for a listener to know whether it was coming from the left or right. So in this photo here, you can see the car is coming from the listener's left. Their job would be to push the button on the left of their little console there if they felt it was coming from the left, and it was as soon as they could determine it was coming from the left. We put headphones on them so they couldn't hear the cars kind of positioning themselves. And then sometimes we had my car at the time, which was a 2004 Honda Accord. There it is. That's my old baby there. Versus it was a 2008 or 2007 Prius, which was right there. I actually have recordings of what these cars sounded like. Now they're going to be moving slowly, so it's going to be quiet. But I think even at this speed, you'll hear a difference. Here is the Accord coming towards a listener. it's quiet. I mean, you know, the automotive industry has done a really nice job of making cars quieter these days, which is wonderful. Here's the Prius. And see if you can listen to determine when it's passing you. Birds in the background, sorry about that, but so you probably can hear it, but it is much quieter. And that's, you know, that was our experience. That was everyone's experience that was out there as well. Okay. The job of the listener is to determine which direction the car is coming from. Okay, here's the actual data. So it's a 2006 Prius and 2004 Accord. That's what it was. Okay. We did one other thing. We wanted to make this a little bit more like a kind of like a normal pedestrian situation. And it's very rare that you just hear cars on their own without any other cars. So what we did is we took two regular combustion engine cars and put them about 30 feet away with their engines kind of just, you know, just being audible, but they, you know, they weren't being revved or anything like that. They were just idling. The engines were idling about 50 feet away. Okay. So let me get that out here. Yeah, okay. So this is what happens. What I'm going to show you now is the results of when listeners on average were able to tell when which direction the Accord was coming from and which direction the Prius was coming from. Okay, and there it is, right there. So on average, listeners could correctly say the Accord was coming from their left or right when the car was still about 22 feet away. The Prius, on the other hand, they could not determine whether it was coming from the left or right until it just passed them. Okay. In fact, it passed them about a foot and a half away. So not until it was right there could they tell that, you know, it was going from their right to left or left to right. So there was a huge kind of functional difference, perceptual difference in when listeners could determine the loudness of these sounds. Okay, so they had greater accuracy with the Accord, and they were much faster at determining which direction the Accord was coming from, left or right. Okay, so we did this research, we presented it at the conferences and all that sort of stuff. So NHTSA, the National Highway Transportation Safety Association, you know, who's you've probably heard of NHTSA before. They track accident records and try to make highways safer, all that sort of stuff. They started looking at this issue as well, and the first thing they found was that even in 2009, and there weren't a whole bunch of hybrid or electric cars then, they found that proportionately speaking, hybrids and electric cars were more likely to be involved in pedestrian accidents than combustion engine cars. So that's the first time they really had hard data to show, yeah, there's something going on. And almost all cases, it was when the cars were going slow. So they kind of continued to track that over time until I think in 2015 maybe, there was a law put into effect that suggested that all cars sold after 2020 needed to have some type of sound on it. Okay. Actually, so now actually I haven't fixed this since 2020. It's not optional anymore. Back then you could, you know, in the early, so 2010 to 2020, it was optional, and many cars did have this. So the Prius came with a sound that was very quiet. The Nissan Leaf, the Tesla Roadster, all came with optional sounds. Now they are mandatory. As of 2020, they are mandatory. Now, I'm going to take a couple seconds here and talk about something that just happened. Let me go ahead and stop this. Share and share something else with you. I think I have this handy. Where is this? No, hold on just a second. Let me set this up for you. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Let me try the share again. Yeah, there it is. Okay. Hopefully you are seeing a web page. Yeah, is everyone seeing a web page now? That is from the New Yorker. And the title of the article of the New Yorker, New Yorker is a magazine. Maybe you know it, maybe your parents know it. But the title of the magazine article is "What Should a 9,000-Pound Electric Vehicle Sound Like?" This is an article that came out yesterday, and it is an article that I was interviewed for, and mentions the research I just presented to you. And what this article argues, and I took issue with this. When I was talking to the writer, who is John Seabrook here, he said he was very concerned about cars getting very noisy because of this issue. And he was worried about all cars having different types of sound. So there'll be just a humongous mess of sound if you're listening to multiple cars at the same time. And I told him I thought that so far the car manufacturers were doing a good job at producing these sounds. So, as I said, we have a lot of electric cars. We have a lot of hybrid cars here on my street, and they do have sounds added, especially, the Teslas do, because they're all electric. And the sounds are on when they're going slow. They're usually they fade out as the car is going faster. They're not needed when the car is going faster. But the sounds are very subtle. They're like maybe, they sound a little like an electric motor. Maybe they sound a tiny bit like a zzz sort of sound. Most of the time, they just kind of sound like a regular car engine, but they're very, very quiet. And I told John Seabrook this, and John had less experience with cars like this because he lives in New York, and I don't know. He was very worried about cars sounding way too noisy because of this issue, because it's mandatory now to have these sounds on cars. Okay, so our research is mentioned in here, and that's very nice of him. But his conclusion from this article is, and I remember he said this during the interview, that he felt like there should be a sound inside the car that only the driver should hear, so they can be aware they need to drive more carefully when they're going slowly. And I said, no, that's not going to do it. Cars need to make some sound. They can be very quiet. And fortunately, because our brains are so sensitive to approaching sounds, there doesn't need to be much sound there at all. It can be, a very, very kind of quiet car engine type sound, but the cars cannot be silent. It would be like cars being invisible to sighted people. This is not just a problem, as you probably are aware of. It's not just a problem for the blind. It's also a problem for sighted folks, as they're distracted by their cell phones and walking around in parking lots. So the problem is not done. I thought the problem had been pretty much settled as of 2020, because the sounds were now mandatory. But there's been some blowback. Now I can see this kind of very conspicuous article that's all over the place. It's been picked up by hundreds of different sites on this, where people are arguing this. Cars could get really noisy. I don't think it's as much of a problem as he thinks it is. Anyway, all right, cool. Any questions about that? Let me change the sharing here. Cool. So any questions on any of this stuff so far? Anything to do with these hybrid cars, electric cars? Anyone have an experience where they had a near miss with a hybrid car or electric car? I think a lot of us have had that type of experience, where quiet cars seem to be appearing out of nowhere sometimes and can be very startling. Anybody? No? Okay. That's all right. Cool. Then we are going to shift our topic here a tiny bit. And let me pull up my notes. We are going to talk about one of my very favorite subjects, which is music perception. Okay, give me just a second here to put this up. Where is music? Oh. Yeah, here we go. All right. So, as I said, this is one of my very favorite topics because I am a musician myself. I've been playing music since I was, gosh, I don't know, 10, something like that. Started playing guitar when I was 13 and have been playing on and off ever since. Was a music minor and everything. Currently in 2 bands, which is actually relatively recent. I hadn't been in a band since I was a professor for many, many years. Being a professor takes up a lot of your time, as does raising kids. But now that my kids are grown, I am in 2 bands. One is a Pink Floyd tribute band. And I have no idea how this worked out for me, but it is an absolute blast. It's a band called Continuous Signal, and I don't know if you've ever seen any Pink Floyd tribute bands on TV or if you're a Pink Floyd fan at all or anything like that. But, you know, when people go to Pink Floyd shows, they're expecting quite a spectacle, and boy, do they get that with us. As you can see from that photo there, we have inflatable objects that we put out during the concert. So there's an inflatable pig, there's an inflatable moon, we have laser lights, we have smoke, we have a video screen, all that sort of stuff. And we play for about 3 hours. We just played in Burbank at the Colony Theater, which would have been a good place for you to see us, but unfortunately we hadn't had class by then, I guess. We were in Big Bear in a couple of weeks, and then Santa Barbara in September, and Oceanside in November. But yeah, keep your eye out. I've had students come before, and it's been a blast. It's been so much fun because they, you know, especially after our music discussion, you know, they can come up and ask questions about the band and stuff like that, and about music and all that sort of thing. So at both the Burbank show and we had a show before that in Brea. There were students, PSYC49 students there from previous quarters. It was a lot of fun. And I'm also in another band that's just getting going called Captain Grumpy, a great name, huh? Which plays a different type of music completely. It plays, it's rock and roll, but it's kind of more upbeat, kind of what we call power pop, you know, kind of like with good melodies, but kind of really driving rock and roll. So yeah, I've been very occupied by these things recently, and I've been thinking a lot about music. So I also do teach a psychology of music course if you're interested sometime in the future. But you know, it was interesting when I knew a lot about music. I didn't know a lot about the psychology of the music literature when I was writing the book, and so I started to read about that. And I found it absolutely fascinating. And I think there's some kind of interesting stories going on in the research on music perception. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that it seems that our notion that there's something special about musicians as listeners versus non-musicians is kind of not nearly as true as we used to think. So in the old days, say 20 years ago even, it was thought that musicians listen to music very differently than non-musicians. They can hear lots of things that non-musicians just can't hear. But we now know that isn't true. I think part of why we now know it isn't true is that the questions we're asking in experiments, the way we're having people perform in experiments now is very different than it used to be. In old music research, you know, they'd ask technical questions about music that only somebody trained in music would be able to answer because they knew the technical terms. But the truth is, whether or not you have experience in playing an instrument, and you're still playing, or you played when you were a kid, or you have no experience playing an instrument, but are an avid listener of music, you enjoy listening to music fairly regularly, your brain is doing the same type of analysis on the sound. In a sense, if you're, you know, an avid music listener, you are expert music listener in many ways as well. And that's what I think is most interesting about the newer music perception research. We'll talk about some of that in just a second. I see there's a chat question. Okay, that's so cool. Cool. Okay. Like Jacqueline, thank you. Maybe you're referring to the fake Pink Floyd band. Thank you. All right. Anyway, let's see. So let's start talking about this a little bit, and then we'll take our break. We're going to start off with a kind of very kind of basic aspect of music listening, which has to do with pitch. So, yeah, what's sometimes called perfect pitch. Now, the terminology here can be a little bit confusing. When you hear the term perfect pitch, it really does have to do with being able to determine whether a pitch is correct or not, and very often whether or not you can sing a pitch that you hear. Okay, so this is in achieving or maintaining a pitch that you're listening for. Okay, so I have a guitar here, which I'll put it on a second, but let me just, okay, I just don't want to make too much noise here. Say you hear this pitch, like that, and I ask you to sing that pitch, like that, right? I'm not a good singer, by the way. I'm just going to have to demonstrate it for you today. The question is, how good could you get? Could you be pretty perfect on matching that pitch? Like that. Now, maybe some of you are great singers. I mean, I'm amazed at how many people can actually really sing well in my classes. I'm so jealous. I wish I had a good voice. But there are people who are astonishingly good at this, right? And so if you read the book, I had a chance to watch what's called a barbershop ensemble perform, and their job is to, in fact, match each other's pitch really well. So do you know what a barbershop quartet is? Maybe you've seen this like on TV or old movies. They sometimes have these at Disneyland or Knott's Berry Farms, and basically it's like these really goofy looking guys with they have like striped shirts. They wear vests, and they have straw hats, and they harmonize in 4-part harmony. What a barbershop ensemble is basically the same type of music and the same type of harmony, but they do it with a group of 200 guys. So they have 50 guys each singing the part of what would normally be one guy in a quartet. And I have a little demonstration of this for you. I'm just going to play a tiny bit so you can hear what they need to do. Fast forward it just a tiny bit. So what their job is essentially is to make 50 guys sound like they're one guy as much as possible. Okay, so they have to be so accurate. 50 guys have to be really accurate in matching the pitch of each other. And they have competitions. This group is like world famous. The one I saw down in Orange County, they're just tremendous. And it takes a lot of work to do that. And singers that are, whether they're singers in the barbershop quartet or, they're singing, just for fun in the shower. If you're a good singer, and you've been trained a little bit, you can match pitch pretty well. So say this is the target pitch. When I try to sing that, because I'm not, a trained singer, I will hit the pitch a little bit off. So here's the target pitch. I'll hit the pitch maybe here, like that, and then maybe slide into it. But trained singers can get really, really good. So they hit the pitch much closer. Okay. So by the way, we're going to start using this term today. We're called semitones, and semitones are just the notes going up on a piano, going white keys and black keys, or the notes going up on a guitar. Each of those are a semitone. Hopefully you're hearing that okay. So when I say a good singer is just off 0.5 or a half a semitone, okay, they would do this. They'd hear this note, and then they would sing this note, right? Which is just a tiny bit off, and then they'd slide right into the note as well as they could. Where me, Rosenblum, I hear this note, and I slide, I have to start here about, which is more, okay? So they can get, so people can get very good, especially if they're trained singers, all right? When it comes to pitch matching. However, how good are other folks? I mean, how good are they at being consistent when it doesn't come to matching? So now we're talking about singers, both trained and untrained, when it comes to free pitch. And what's meant by free pitch is whether people can just start on their own preferred pitch and sing a song like Happy Birthday or something like that, and then end up basically on the pitch they started. Are people good if they're not asked to match pitches, okay, but instead are asked just to sing to their best ability? Are they fairly close? And I think this probably is a good place to stop here. I'll wait for you to, you'll have to wait to find out the answer about how good bad singers are in just 10 minutes. So let's take a 10-minute break and we'll come back and we'll continue this story. Mm-hmm. How do I? Mm-hmm. Okay. We are recording. Let's see here. No, we're pinned. Cool. All right. So let's go back to our slides. Ew. Hold on a second. Good. Make me big. Okay. So again, the big story here with music is that non-trained individuals, just normal music listeners, turn out to have a much more sophisticated music listening brain than we ever thought. And they turn out to actually be better at things like pitch perception and pitch creation as well. And that's what we're showing here now. So yes, it is the case that a trained singer will be able to match a pitch they hear more accurately. That's why the folks in the barbershop quartet are so good, because they train so much. But if you're asked to do something else with pitch, if you're asked to just be consistent with a pitch that you choose yourself, the question is, how good are you? So this is how it was tested. Some researchers went to I guess this was at the University of Montreal or something like that. What's the big university there? I can't remember. Actually, there's a ton of music research that happens up in Canada for some reason. But this was done up in Quebec or Montreal. And they went out to a park and just went up to people with a microphone and said, would you mind doing a little singing for us? And, they made sure that these people had no expertise in singing. If they did, they would go on to somebody else. And people would be happy if someone came up to me like that. I would be very shy about it. And I'm in bands. People did it. They were willing to do it. And again, they were all novices. They were asked to sing the same song, just starting on whatever pitch they wanted. It would be like somebody coming up to us and asking us to sing Happy Birthday. Very simple song with a very simple melody that, you can sing with starting on any pitch you want. Okay. So this, in fact, is the song, if you're interested. I have it here. Might as well listen to a little piece of it. Let me forward it. Ses yeux ou nos regards se mirent. C'est demain que j'avais 20 ans. Here comes the song that this part. Gens du pays, c'est votre tour de vous laisser parler d'amour. Gens du pays, c'est votre tour de vous laisser parler d'amour. So it's an easy song to sing, right? It's like Happy Birthday, or, Mary Had a Little Lamb, or, any sort of like simple folk tune you could imagine. They made it easy for folks. But the question is, how consistent were they in their pitch, right? So, oh boy, I don't know this song at all, but. Oh, so something like that, right? Oh, I forgot it. Right? And then, so when they started on this note, oh, I guess it's this note, sorry. How consistent were they when they first started that note versus the second time? There's the note. And they took all these recordings back to the lab, and they found that when people started on the note they preferred to start on, they weren't asked to, match something they heard, but were just asked to sing with some consistency. They did a pretty good job. Okay, maybe they'd be off for a semitone, So it might be something like, but not that much. In fact, they would be much more accurate than if they tried to match a pitch they heard. So here you're seeing kind of like the first example of, kind of making a task, a musical task, a little bit easier for somebody who's a non-musician, and finding, they do have this ability. They have this ability to be pretty darn accurate. Okay, this is the first part of the experiment. They also asked people to sing with a consistent tempo, and in this song you can imagine it's pretty easy. Da 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 da. Right? People were outstanding at this. Right? They just were very, very, very consistent, and in fact they were as consistent in their tempo as a professional singer would be, which was really surprising. I mean, they knew that there'd be a little bit of a pitch kind of fluctuation, but they also thought there'd be tempo fluctuations, and people are outstanding at that sort of thing. Again, people with no musical training whatsoever. Okay. They then decided to do a second version of the experiment. And in that version of the experiment, they asked people to sing slowly. To sing, just to sing in a relaxed way, but to sing slowly so it was an easy song for them to sing. So, you just heard the version, which is a little fast. Now, sing slowly and try to be accurate as you're singing. Right? And when they asked people to slow down, it was amazing at how consistent they were with the pitch. In fact, they were as consistent with matching the pitch from the first time they sang it. Right? Here's the pitch again. And if they're singing it fast, it might sound like this. Right? You heard the difference there. But if they sang it slowly, it was nearly perfect. 0.3 semitones is negligible, and it is as good as a professional singer, which was just absolutely amazing. So they ran about 30 people in the experiment, and the vast majority of them were really good, even though they had no professional training, no singing experience in a chorus or anything like that. They really chose people who felt like they weren't great singers, but they turned out to be really good when it came to that pitch matching. They did find 2 people out of the 30 that were not good. Okay, they just couldn't really do a good job, so maybe it sounded like this. Even when they were singing slow, they just weren't very good at this. I mean, you could kind of recognize the melody, and certainly with the words you could recognize the song, but they just weren't great. Okay, so they were bad with pitch, but they were not bad with tempo. Even these folks who really weren't great singers, and maybe you know somebody like this in your family, like when they sing Happy Birthday, it's like, wow. There are people like that just really can't, they're just not great at having accurate pitch. They might not know, by the way, I have a very close friend who is so sure he's a great singer, and oh my gosh, we don't have the heart to tell him that it's not true. He tries to sing with bands I'm in and stuff. It's funny. Anyway, but in his case, the same thing. Even if he's bad with pitch, the tempo is really, really good. And I'm sure this is also true of my friend. It was certainly true of the people in the experiment they ran in Quebec, that they then made sure that there wasn't something wrong with how the bad singer, was hearing pitches. Okay, so they would say, are these pitches, are these pitches the same or different? They play this pitch and then this one and say same or different. They say, that's a little different. Same, okay, and do different pitches now. Same or different? Different. Same. And those folks that couldn't sing were perfectly fine with that, as good as anybody else would be. It's in fact as good as professional singers, probably. So they did not have perceptual deficits. They did not have any deficit in being able to recognize when, pitches were higher or lower than other pitches or something like that. However, okay, it turns out that there are people that do have this problem. It's not most of us. In fact, people kind of get very I guess, open with these terms. They don't typically use these terms, right? But when somebody asks you if you can sing, you say, "No, I'm totally tone deaf." What that implies, tone deafness, is that you not only can't sing well, but you can't hear the pitches of a guitar being off, or you can't hear somebody else being off in a pitch a little bit. It's typically not like this. About 17% of the population will say this. And it's not much. It's like, 17% is not a whole lot. It is like my friend, potentially. But again, it's not a problem of perceiving pitch, it's a problem of producing pitch. And it really has, there could be a lot of reasons for this. And in fact, if you watch some of these singing competitions and you see the early rounds where people who really can't sing very well try to, audition for the show, and they're conspicuously bad. Very often, it's not that they're not able to produce pitches very well, but it has something to do with how consistent their voice sounds, whether their breath control is good, that sort of thing. But these folks as well aren't really going to have problems perceiving, even if they really do have some problems singing consistent pitches and that sort of thing. There are, as I said, though, people who do really have trouble perceiving pitches and whether or not the pitches are higher or lower than others or consistent or that sort of thing. It is a much smaller portion of the population, 4%, and they have what's called amusia. And amusia is not just a problem that's going to show up in trying to sing, but it's also going to show up in listening to pitches. So somebody with amusia would have trouble determining whether this is an ascending or descending scale. So is that scale I just played going up or down? And most people would say that that's up and that this is down. That's down. Right? I think probably a majority of us can say that. They can also say that this note is higher than this note. Right? The first note is higher than the second note. Somebody with amusia will not be able to do this. Okay? They might not be able to say that this note is higher than this note, and they would not be able to say that this is a scale going up in pitch and this is a scale going down in pitch. And it's very few people. And the thing about amusia, it's interesting. I don't know a whole lot about it. I haven't done much reading on it myself. But I don't think there's evidence that people that have amusia enjoy music any less or have any rhythmic disruptions whatsoever or bad dancers or anything like that. So it's interesting. There's so many different aspects of music that one can enjoy, even if it means not necessarily knowing which pitch is higher than which other pitch or something like that. It doesn't really affect their life all that much. They might not be able to join a choir. They might be a little embarrassed during Happy Birthday singing, but for the most part, it's not that big a hindrance, even when it comes to music appreciation. Okay. So what about remembering pitches? All right, so let's go ahead and forward the slide here. What I'm going to be talking about now is remembering what pitch a song that you've heard is played in. Because you might know if you've taken any music lessons, or you certainly have an intuition for this. If I play this melody, right? If I play that melody, hopefully everyone's recognizing it somewhere with a rainbow, right? That I can play it with those notes, or I can play it in a different key. That's how we say it, a different key. It's basically the same melody, but with a different collection of notes in it. right? So you recognize that as the same melody, hopefully, right? Also Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Same melody as this. Same melody as this, for that matter. Oop. Right, same melody as that. And it is the case that, in fact, the same melody can be played in with 11 different positions. 11 different groups of notes. They're not completely different from each other, but the way it works is a scale involves, with all the notes in between, 12 different semitones. Don't worry about this part, but you know. Right, going from the low to the high, which means that any melody can be played in 11 different ones. So there's 1, 2. And you can keep on going up until you end up exactly where you started, which is actually what's called an octave higher. Okay, way up there. So you have 11 different keys or groups of pitches that any song can be in. And so when you hear a song, okay, when you hear your favorite song, so what's your favorite song right now? Trying to think of it. I listen to radio with my kids, and so, boy. Oh, yeah, is Drake? Yeah, wait. I'm trying to think of a good song. Oh, well, think about your favorite song. I can't come up with anything that has a melody. I know my son listens to a lot of hip hop, so there's not a lot of really well-defined melody and some of that stuff. It's, you know, rap. But there's some song. No, I can't remember. I'll ask my son for next time. Anyway, think about your favorite song. And the question is, when you think about that song and you think about Drake singing it or Doja Cat or somebody singing that song, does she sing? Or she just rap? Anyway, who else? Taylor Swift, right? With that singing a real melody. Do you think about that song, or if you go ahead and want to sing it in the, just by yourself without a recording of it in the shower, right? Do you sing it in the same, with the same group of notes? And forever we thought, no, the only folks that might be able to do that or might remember the key of songs are professional musicians, and very few of them can do it as well. Okay, but it turns out you actually have a better memory for that than you would think. Okay, so these are memories of specific pieces and performance that are nearly in the same pitch as those heard. And people are much better than this. So when you think of your favorite Taylor Swift song or a Adele song or something like that, you actually are thinking of it in the key that she sang it in, right? Again, the key could be here, 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 here. You have 11 choices, but your memory of it is actually much better than we ever used to think of. And that's revealed in a lot of things. There's a lot of data that suggests that. So for example, singing tasks. If you were told to come in and sing, what's that Adele song, Hello, is that what it's called? And you were just, it's one of your songs that you know really well. And you were not given any context to say, go ahead and sing it however you want to, you would not be too far off from the original song. Now, you might not sing it with like Adele, but you would sing it so that the notes were pretty accurate to the way she sang it. In fact, imagine she comes in and sings Somewhere Over the Rainbow. She's doing a Judy Garland tribute album, right? And that's how she sings it, okay? Beautifully, because she's got such a great voice. If you were to come in now and be asked to sing Adele's version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, you would come in and maybe you'd be a semitone off, but you'd be very close to this. You would not come in other words, after hearing her version and sing something like this. Okay, you would sing it pretty close to where she sings it. Other things, well, moms, when asked to sing lullabies, whatever your mom's favorite lullaby was to you, Rockabye Baby, maybe, Spanish lullaby, something like that. When asked to come back a week later and sing the same melody to their child, they would sing it pretty much exactly with the same notes they sang it the previous week, even without knowing that that was the task. Again, in these experiments, people are typically not asked to do, to try to match the pitch they did last week or anything like that. They say, okay, we'd like to record you singing a bunch of lullabies to your baby, and they'll record them, and then they'll have them come back next week. We'd like to have you do it again, just for fun. We just want to see how you do. And moms will sing it in the same group of notes, the same pitch. But there's other ways of showing that you have a very good pitch memory that are even easier, that don't involve you singing, which are pretty cool. These are just listening tasks where subjects are asked to judge whether a song they know well, in this case it will be TV themes they know from various TV shows, are in the correct key from the ones they heard on TV, or in the incorrect key, or whether that they sound right or don't sound right. Let me give you an example. Well, let me go ahead and put this up first. So adults are asked to come in and judge whether TV themes they know well are in the correct key or shifted by 1 or 2 tones. So say there was a theme song to back in fact, there was, even before I was born, I think, there was a Judy Garland show where when it came on TV, guess the theme they played? It's time for the Judy Garland show. Okay, would you remember that was the right key if you heard in a different key? Okay. That's the question they asked. Of course, they're going to do it with more modern, somewhat more modern theme songs. So I've got a little demonstration for this, and I'm going to play these theme songs. You're going to actually hear the theme songs in 2 different keys with 2 different sets of notes. One of them is correct, and one of them is incorrect. And your job as the listener is to say whether the first one is correct or the second one is correct. Okay. Oh no, you're kidding me. Here it is. Okay, so you know that theme, right? Everyone knows this one. Believe me, as I go through other themes, I've never heard that before. That's okay. This is an old experiment. But you know that one. And is the first version that's right or the second version? Okay. So, just guess by yourself and see which you think sounds better. I think the correct answer is the second one. Not everyone gets this right, but they are, across subjects and across all the songs, they're better than chance levels, which is really good. Okay, here's another one. I think you'll know this one. Most people know this one. It's on reruns, so hopefully you'll know it. First one or second one? Okay, let's play it again. It's the theme difference. Yeah, Jacqueline got it. It is. Again, it is the second one. All right. Don't know if you guys are going to know this. I think this is the music during whatchamacallit, Jeopardy. Oops. Here we go. For the final question, whatever that's called. Okay. Again, maybe you recognize that? So that one you probably heard less. That one actually, the first one is the correct key. But anyway, you get the idea. The other 2 things I think you're certainly not going to know. Let's see. Wow, maybe you know this. This is still on, right? I think it's the. I think in this case it's the second one. Let me see. No, it's the first one, I think. All right. You get the idea, right? Well, it turns out people are much better at this than the scientists expected, really. Most people were really good, especially, what you just heard was the two semitone task, where the songs are actually played two semitones, so it was versus, what was it? Right. Da, 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 da. So that's two semitones, right? One, two. First starting here, first semitone away, second tone away. And when you do that, people are really good at it. They're especially good. Okay. Let's see. What else do we want to say? Oh, yeah. So not only are adults good at this, and adults, of course, do have some listening practice to this sort of thing, even though they've never been asked to do this sort of task before. It turns out infants are also really good at this. Not quite as good, but infants that were tested at 7 months were exposed to their mom's lullabies and what they did with their mom's voice. And this is what was done with the TV themes that you just heard, is that the recordings were pitch shifted, and you can do this relatively easily these days using a computer. So they took the mom's lullaby recording and they shifted it higher or lower. And what they could tell based on how infants would be attentive, and there's different ways of measuring attention that we'll be talking about later in the quarter. They found that infants would be more attentive when the melodies they heard were in the correct pitch than if the melodies they heard had been pitch shifted either up or down. So infants can do this at least at 7 months. They have a sense of what the correct pitch is, which is pretty interesting. And this is also completely true with rhythm, and it's probably even more true with rhythm in a lot of ways. You would be able to tell if you heard the Simpsons theme in the same key now twice. Okay, so the pitch of the notes didn't change, but one was a little faster than the original recording on the TV show. Okay, or the theme from Friends was again in the same key, the same notes, but it was played a little bit slower. People are really good at this. People are really, really good. They have a very good sense. And again, what we're building up here is the idea that even if you don't have music lessons, you have very little music training in your personal history, that you do have listening in your personal history that has made you sensitive to a lot of these dimensions we used to think were only available to trained musicians. So your listening brain is doing more sophisticated analysis of music than we used to think, and it's also retaining this information in more elaborate ways than we used to think. Okay, at the bottom of the slide. So if you're looking at the slide yourself, if you've downloaded the slides, I've got this section on episodic memory, and I am actually going to leave this out. I'm not going to have time to talk about it this quarter because it's the summer. You can cross that off of your slide. It is actually on my slide too, but I'm not going to be talking about the last 3 lines of this slide. It is in the book if you're interested in it, but I'm not going to be testing you on the last 3 lines, starting with episodic memories. Okay, but we are going to continue talking about your kind of magical hidden musical skills that you may not have been aware that you had. And this has to do with a more sophisticated aspect of musical listening. This has to do not with individual notes and individual keys, but the relationship between notes. Okay, the relationship between notes, because that really is an important component of music. This is something that is really kind of makes up ultimately what turns into the emotional aspects of music, as you'll hear. So what is a musical interval? An interval is just the relationship between a few notes, right? So here's a relationship between 2 notes, right? But here's the thing. It's the relationship if the notes are played consecutively, one after the other, or together, right? I can play those two notes together. Oops, let me try it again so there's no other notes with it. There you go, that's nice. Okay, here's another relationship that we'll be talking about in just a second. It's a little bit of a different relationship than we just heard. There it is. Okay, that's a different relationship between notes. Yeah, the first note's the same, you're absolutely right. I know you're thinking that. And now here it is together. All right. Those are that's a specific musical interval. Now here's one other. Okay, and here's where you're going to see how the emotional component starts becoming important here. There is one musical interval that you just heard being played together. Here's another one. Aha! You're getting the idea, aren't you? Let me see, there's a chat question. I'm sorry I missed this before. Yeah. Thank you, Jack. Yeah, there were some harder ones there. Thank you for that. Cool. Anyway, let's go back to this again. Okay, here's one type of interval. Here's another type of interval. Now, you probably don't know the names of these intervals if you don't have musical training. That's fine. It's not important you know the names, but boy, does your brain know something about these intervals. Okay, right? Here's the here's a way I can include those intervals versus by actually including it in something a little bit more complicated. Right? Versus right. Well, here, let me just do that. So it's, and you can hear the difference. In fact, that's in some ways one of the most salient differences, one of the most important differences in Western music. Okay, you get the idea now, because you're hearing the emotional component. Hopefully you're hearing one is a happy chord, one is a sad chord, one is a happy interval, one is a sad interval. Okay, this is how it works then. Here's what I'm going to tell you. Oh, sorry, I gotta do this. Okay. You implicitly, without being consciously aware of the technical aspects of the interval, you know them. That's what's meant by implicitly here. You know pitch intervals, right? So I'll show you right now, you know, some, because I've been playing them over and over again, and they've meant something to you. You know an interval that's called an octave, and I will play an octave. Basically, an octave is where you play the lowest note in a scale and then the kind of highest note that the scale lands on. What I mean by that is, here's a scale. See how it kind of lands on the note it started with? It's the same note, but it's what's called an octave higher. But you get the idea. Right? You know that scale kind of sounds the same, but it's an octave higher. So that's an octave. Oops. Not used to playing this guitar. You get the idea, all right? Okay. So this range, this interval, this jump from one note to another is an octave. And you know it, because you know it's the first two notes of the song we've been playing all morning. A lot of tune. Cool. And so when you hear the beginning of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, you know those, now I've told you, the first two notes are an octave. But when you hear an octave, if you kind of think in your head, what melody does that remind you of? Somewhere, somewhere, right? Now you know, you can go ahead and tell all your friends you can recognize an octave when you hear it, right? It doesn't even have to start with that note. I'll start on another note. Like when it makes that big jump like that and kind of lands on a higher version of the first note you heard, You're hearing an octave. Okay, you're hearing an octave. That's all it means. So now you have a name for a relationship between two notes, a very important relationship between two notes that you didn't have a name for before. But that's it. That you just learned a new name. That's it. Okay. Here's another one. All right. I played this one for you before. Okay. Let's think about a good song that this starts off with. You know this song? Kumbaya? Recognize it? Right? Maybe you sing it over campfires or church or something like that. It's beautiful. Such a simple melody, but it's very calming, I think. The first two notes are what's called a major third. It's this, by the way, if you're interested, it's called a major third because it's the third note of the second note you're hearing is actually the third note of that scale. 1, 2, 3. And so to play the major third, you do. And so now when you hear that interval, and it makes you think of Kumbaya, you have a name for it. You say, that's my friend, the major third. That's the interval that starts off Kumbaya. Right? Cool. Now, you also know what's called a minor third. And what that is it's similar to the second note, but it's a tiny bit different. It's a little lower. And boy, does it change the mood of the song, right? Right? So you can't get Kumbaya, you can't get the relaxing, kind of happy, peaceful, kind of settled Kumbaya out of that, right? Sounds much more kind of menacing, doesn't it? Right? Sounds weird, right? Okay. Bring it down here. Woo. And there's lots of songs that have that minor third. Right? Do you know that song? What Child Is This? Or Green Sleeves. I don't know if people know this song. Oh, Alas My Love, I guess. But it's a very, very common melody, Renaissance melody, I think, originally. Oop. Oop. Right? And that first interval, though, is very recognizable. You know what else? I don't know if you're an old classic rock fan, but when I was a kid, the first song you learned on guitar was called Smoke on the Water, right? I'm just playing it in this key, so we're keeping it consistent. But if you know Smoke on the Water, those are the first two notes of Smoke on the Water. That's actually sad to say. That's how I think of these notes. Okay, anyway. The thing is, we both, you and me, can recognize them by kind of having a song in mind that starts with those notes. And now you just have a name for it. It's the minor third. And you now know a bunch about music theory. And it's not because I was a great teacher and taught like a year's worth of music theory to you in 5 minutes. It's because your brain could always hear these things and just didn't have names for them. And that's part of the same story. As a music listener, your brain's analyzing music like musicians, okay? At least very much like musicians in most cases. You just don't have the names. You just don't. And if you get the names, then you can name any musician in the world if you had all the names. But let's see how you're doing here. So is this an octave? I'm going to hide the guitar so you can't see it by what little of the guitar you can see on the image. Just do it by sound. Is this an octave, a minor third, or a major third? Think about what song that is. Is that Somewhere Over the Rainbow? Is it Kumbaya, or is it What Child Is This? Oops. Okay, hopefully in your head you're singing Somewhere, and if it's Somewhere Over the Rainbow, it's an octave. Okay? What about this interval? Is this An octave, a major third, or a minor third? Sing your song. Is it Somewhere Over the Rainbow? Is it Kumbaya? Is it What Child Is This? Or Smoke on the Water? It's Kumbaya. So it's a major third. I mean, and right, you would be able to, hearing this from now on, you could say, oh, there's my friend, the major third. It makes me happy. Versus the minor third, right, which is a little bit more menacing, which is a little bit more sad, melancholy, right? Okay. And that is in fact the beginning of Alas My Love, What Child Is This, whatever. Now the thing is, not only do you know it, I actually played it with the original notes I taught this to you at. I can do this anywhere on the guitar or on a piano or with any instrument, and you'd be able to tell those. So now I'm going to change the key, essentially. I'm going to change which notes are involved, and you tell me whether it's an octave, a minor third, or a major third. Major third, octave, or minor third? Yeah, you know, right? That's an octave. Somewhere versus this interval. Which one is that? Is that Somewhere Over the Rainbow? Is it Kumbaya? Or is it What Child Is This? Alas My Love. It's the minor. It's the minor third, right? So now you're done. You can now go tell everybody you're an expert musician. No, of course, it takes a lot more than that to be an expert musician, but the point is that your brain has been listening and recognizing these all your life, okay? And it's been, here, so I want to say this, that you can do this skill now in all keys, that you're able to now just put a name on it. And, you know, does it give you an advantage? Well, it's fun. You can, you know, impress people at parties if you want to or something like that. But more than that, it uncovers what your brain's always been doing just without the technical terms, which is great. And you know, part of this is how we hear emotion in music, right? Versus happy, sad, that sort of thing. And our brain is especially good at recognizing those aspects of music, the aspects that have meaning, right? And we'll talk about that in just a second, how our brain hears meaning in music. I think you'll find that really interesting, but you know, I'll just do a little bit here. So here's a sad chord. Oh God, that's not in tune. I'll play it a little lower. There's a sad chord, there's a happy chord, but we can hear so much more nuance that this is a sad chord. This is probably close to a sad chord, but probably there's another kind of, I don't know, is there an emotional component there that's a little different from sad, or a little bit maybe a different, you know, kind of subtle variation on sad? So it's this. That's almost like a sadness that has a, I don't know if there's a bitterness that's to the sadness or something like that. Or a sadness that's creating a certain kind of jadedness or something like that. I don't know. It doesn't make a difference, but I mean, you can feel these emotions just with these different intervals. In that case, you've got your minor interval. It's, but I'm actually adding another note, just making it a tiny bit more complicated. I'm adding another interval on top of that. That's giving you another emotion. Here's your happy chord. What's this then? That's great. What is that? You've heard that before, probably. So here's your standard happy chord with your major third that could start Kumbaya. But I'm adding another note in there that's making this happy a little bit different. I don't know, I would say that's happy maybe, and relaxed happy, or kind of just satisfied, or I don't know, I'm trying to think of a different word that might describe this, the feeling that this chord might give. Familiar happiness, comfortable happiness, something like that, I don't know. We all have different reactions to this to some degree, but it's interesting how much consistency is actually experienced, especially folks that have grown up in a Western musical culture. Okay, it's really interesting. Okay, we'll come back to the mood of music in just a second, but I think this is a good time to take a little polling question here. So I will stop my slide sharing and go to the polls. And I think here, what we will do is go back to auditory approach. Yeah, let's do this because we can save the last question for just at the end. Okay, now this has to do with the brain's reaction to auditory approach, right? So which type of sound is known to especially activate areas in the brain associated with attention and motor reactivity, as well as a greater proportion of cells overall? Which type of sound will induce that? Okay, is it A, sounds that are constant intensity or constant loudness? B, sounds that have no intensity. C, sounds with increasing intensity or increasing in intensity. Sounds decreasing in intensity. Okay, I'll give you a minute to go ahead and answer this one. Again, no bearing on, completely anonymous, no bearing on your grade. Okay. Good, that should do it. Let me end, and it looks like this one's a little confusing to people. So let me share the results. The correct answer is 3, so most of you did get that, or a majority of you got that, I suppose. But let's talk about, yeah, you know something? I think I know why there was confusion here. I actually just changed this question this morning. So I think I'm going to have to change it again before I put it on the test. So let's do that together. So I think people were a little distracted by the term loudness that was after intensity to the first answer, and I didn't include that to the second, third, and fourth. Okay. If I had, you would have known that intensity in this case refers to loudness. Always in this case. I just put it for the first one so people would be reminded that it is the same. But if you thought that's the only one that really referred to loudness, then I can understand that you might be confused on that. So I will put the term loudness at the end of option B, C, and D as well for the exam. Okay, the correct answer is C. So those cells in the brain, in the auditory brain, and cells that are involved in reactivity, whether it's extra attention or kind of motor reactions, are going to respond to increasing intensity, which is the same as a sound getting closer to you. So the brain does seem especially sensitive to sounds getting louder, sounds getting more intense, which means that they're probably getting closer to you, or that very often they're getting closer to you at least. So that's not the answer for A. So A is just a constant intensity. B is a no intensity, meaning that they don't have any sound whatsoever. C is correct. It's increasing intensity that fires off these cells, these extra cells. And D, sounds decreasing intensity, doesn't do that. Okay, this one's a little more confusing. I think I just made it more confusing by leaving the term loudness off of C, B, or B, C, and D. The correct answer here is C. It will be the correct answer on the exam, but I will add the terms loudness so there's no confusion on those options as well. Okay, take a picture if you haven't yet, and we will move on. Are there any questions about this? I apologize for the confusion. I realized when I put the question up just now, I probably should have put loudness on the end of all of them. Okay, no problem. Okay, let's move on then. And what did I do here? Yeah, let's move on. We're going to skip this next slide. That's okay. And move right to Yeah. Music's deep structure. So let's go ahead and post that. So what we've been talking about so far, when we talk about pitches and even intervals between pitches, and to some degree even the chords that these intervals make up, meaning, you know, when you have more than just two notes together. We're talking about what musicians call surface structure, and it's not really, well, you should know that term. I think there is an exam question related to this. But what we're going to move towards now is what's called a deep structure of music. This is going to be the structure of music that involves kind of like themes and full melodies and of course the emotional connotations of the melodies and the sounds and that sort of thing. So we're really talking about the more complicated thing that's built, you know, kind of based on the pitches and the pitch relationships and stuff like that. So it's kind of the deep stuff that's underneath the superficial or the surface stuff of just pitches and things like that. So for example, variations on a theme. Okay. In other words, I'm trying to think of a, yeah, this is fine. I can stay with this song because it's such a simple song and people know it. Okay, so what that melody does, why that, one of the reasons, you know, first of all, let's all agree, it really is a nice melody, right? I mean, you know, you've heard it, you know, hundreds of times, and it's associated with certain memories and all that sort of stuff, watching the movie maybe with your family, all that sort of thing. So yes, but it is a really nicely written song. You know, it kind of glides up and down and that sort of thing. But one reason it works is how the second part of that fits with the first. So it's, here's the second verse. Oh, shoot, sorry. Okay, it's not the verse, actually the second phrase, I say. That's the first phrase. Here's the second phrase. See how that kind of sounds a little like the first phrase, but it's a little different. It is a variation on the theme. So in Somewhere Over the Rainbow, we could call this the theme. And here's the variation on the theme. Here's another variation. Okay, why is that a variation? Why is that a different variation? Because the pattern, the rhythmic pattern is the same. Da, 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 da. So this is also a variation because it has that a little bit of a jump. But then this is a variation which includes different notes. Right? But there's that rhythmic pattern that ties it to the original. Okay? So your brain knows that. And that's part of why your brain probably finds that, you know, to the degree that you can kind of look over the schmaltziness and the associations, that it's a nice melody. It's fun. It would be a fun thing to sing. It's a very memorable melody because all those little variations in the other phrases tie back to the original one. And your brain is doing this all the time. And, you know, we know this through experiments, not experiments in my lab, but experiments in Canada. A lot of them are doing it in Canada, as I said, where people are you know, played a kind of complicated classical piece and are told to say which kind of phrase goes with that theme that you just heard. And people have no trouble doing this, even if it's just played on piano. So, you know, there's not a lot of like, you know, extra information about what instruments are used or something like that. They'll say, yeah, this works with this theme. Here's a variation from that theme. And they might not even know why the different parts kind of go well together, the different phrases go well together, but they're able to do it well enough that they're absolutely correct when they kind of match pieces. So that's one thing they know. People are very good at that. So, you know that this, then oh, sorry, that there's a certain pattern in there, even if you never really noticed before. So that's a variation on a theme, and it works across all styles of music, including the popular music of today, and folk music and jazz and all that sort of stuff. It's a really critical part of what makes music, enjoyable to us. What else? Things like the key of the song or the resolution, I think, is maybe a better way of thinking of it, right? So if I play, where's that melody probably going to end up? Say, oh, probably here, right? So if I do this, that doesn't sound right. The resolution to that phrase is right back there, right? So that's where it resolves to. You can tell where the melody resolves, even though you've had no experience writing music or analyzing music or anything like that. You know where the melody should go, okay? Guess what? That's not only true of music that you like and listen to, it's true of certain styles of music that you may not like and maybe have heard very little of. So give this a listen right here. I don't know, maybe you do listen to this. That's fine. I sometimes I'll listen to this. I've been to concerts like this, right? This, by the way, is called atonal or 12-tone music, right? It's not important, the details of the name. But, I think, for it, on a first kind of listen, it kind of sounds kind of like almost random notes, right? Right? It sounds like the notes don't necessarily fit together. It kind of sounds like somebody, is kind of, just randomly hitting keys on a piano, or in this case, playing random notes on a violin. The truth is there are rules behind this style of music. The rules can be really weird. So depending on the style of 12-tone music, the composer of 12-tone music, it can be like, okay, here's a rule. You're going to play the theme, which may not even sound like a theme. Maybe what you just heard was the statement of the theme. But then you're going to hear variations. And how are you going to establish the variations? Get this. What you can do for a variation is you can take the piece of music that's written out on the staff and flip it over. And there's your variation. That doesn't seem like it's going to sound very good. Or you take the piece of music and you reverse it. So you're going backwards now. You're playing the notes backwards, and there's your variation. Okay. But here's the thing. Even as a person, I do listen to some of this music sometimes. It can be, monster movies, right? Or horror movies sometimes have this type of music, of course. But, you have a little experience through horror movies, but not a whole bunch. At least not listening to it for pleasure, usually. Your brain is still sensitive to the rules of 12-tone music. So if you were played that piece you just heard, the recording you just heard, and then heard maybe another phrase of it later on, you would know, even if the phrase was reversed or played upside down, you would know that that phrase went with that piece, even without knowing what the music's about and it not making much sense to you whatsoever. Okay, so you have this kind of sophisticated brain that even with music that doesn't seem to follow the normal rules, you can pick out these kind of crazy rules of reversing the piece and inverting the piece and all that sort of thing. It's just amazing. Okay, I got to end a tiny bit early today. So I'm going to end here. We'll start talking about the emotional aspects of music next class, but I want to give you one more question, one more polling question. And this one has to do with music, and it has to do with amusia. So, amusia. Which of the following is or are true about amusia? So it could be one choice, or as you'll see, it could be both A and B, that sort of thing. Oops. Okay. A. It's the only explanation for poor singing. So when somebody has trouble singing, does that mean they necessarily have amusia? B. Affects about 50% of the population. Is that true? That it affects 50% of the population? C. Is usually diagnosed by reports of weakened food flavor. Okay, that's a kind of odd distractor. I'll tell you, it's not the correct answer. Or D, none of the above. The food's on there because you're going to have a little bit on flavor and taste before the midterm. That's why that distractor is on there. You know it's not correct. Right. So really, is it A, B, or maybe D, none of the above? Let's go ahead and launch and have you respond to this. And if you need to go back and look at the original slide, you can. Okay, I'll give you a few more seconds here. Okay, I think that's good. So I will stop the poll and share the results. And most of you did get this correct. The correct answer is in fact D in this case. None of the above are actually components that are true about amusia. Okay, there are many explanations for poor singing. Amusia is actually the least likely of them. So there are people who have trouble matching pitches, or they have trouble controlling their voices, that sort of thing, but they don't have trouble hearing pitches. And that's what amusics do have trouble with. They have trouble hearing if one note is higher or lower than another note, or if you're going up or down a scale. And that's going to affect singing, most likely. But it's not the only reason that somebody is having trouble singing. In fact, it's the kind of the least likely. It is a reason, but it is one that's least likely to be. It affects, fortunately, fewer than 50% of the population, much less than 50% of the population. I think we said in that slide, what is it, 4% or something like that? Maybe 5%, I can't remember, but it's not half the people of the population. It's not 50%. C has to do with food, and that's not correct, because the music we just learned about has to do with listening and music. And so in this case, the correct answer is D, none of the above. And go ahead and take a picture of that. All right, terrific. So we need to stop here today. I need to stop just a few minutes early. I have an appointment, but I will see you on Thursday for more discussions of music. Bye-bye.